everyone, welcome back to Scarecrow Joe's studio, and specifically to the paper mache gargoyle tutorial. We're coming into part 5 where we're going to continue on with the sculpt on this. In the last segment we did a lot of other sculpting. I attached some additional horns and I ended up carrying on off camera and claying over the remaining strip mache portions of the wings that I didn't get to. But in this segment, one thing that I did do before we get into this segment and continuing the sculpting that I want to point out is that I kept looking at this guy, and you know, I put these other set of horns. I didn't know, you know, for sure if I was going to, you know, make them into another set of you know, a set of horns or some ears, because I did initially have these right here as a set of horns. But I don't know if you can tell or not. I'll bring this forward a little bit more. I ended up going in and just marking an area in here, and then I cut that area out, and I did it on both of these, which were going to be horns, but I decided to make them ears. So now they're going to be ears. So I cut that out. And of course, because, you know, I have all of that thin flexible pieces of cardboard strips in there where I initially strip mached over, so I had to cut all of that out as well, and it was really easy to do so. I just took a pair of scissors, and some of it I was able to just tuck back in behind those ears, or will now be the ears. And then I just simply took some masking tape and blocked in those areas, but I made the masking tape so that they're not flush against these areas, but I made them concave. And this is going to be, because it's such a small surface area, this is going to be perfectly fine for me to apply my paper mache clay over and build out those ears. So on that note, I'm not sure how far I'm going to get with this segment and continuing the sculpt. I would like to get as far as I can, so there may be one other segment following this one on finishing the sculpt, and then an additional one on painting and sealing it after it's all been finished and dry. With the length of these video segments and these tutorials, I'm trying to keep in mind how long they take, and so I'm trying to trim them down a bit. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to go as far as I can without trying to go over like 40 or 45 minutes on this, and we'll see how far we get. But let's get going, because I've got a fresh batch of clay ready, and I'm ready to go. Alright, before I get started here, I do want to show you something. I have all of these teeth or talons, and what can also represent toenails as well. I happen to have on hand, this is Sculpting clay, so it's oven baked Sculpting clay. And I had, you know, I do a lot of things. I make a lot of art that involves fangs or teeth. And so you know, sometimes I use them, sometimes I don't. And so I end up with a bunch of excess. So I just wanted to show you this. You can, instead of using your paper mache clay to form your teeth or your talons and your toenails, you can also use Sculpting clay. And that works perfectly fine as well. I'm not sure what I'm going to use, if I'm going to use the Sculpting clay or if I'm going to use the polymer, or I'm sorry, if I'm going to use the paper mache clay yet. But I do have that option. So that is an option as well for you. And I do actually, here are my eyeballs that I made from the paper mache clay. So these are a little bit bigger, but still you can see the opening. That's going to make them look more three-dimensional, that people could see that it's not just that hollowed area. But then I also had on hand these little polymer clay or Sculpting clay eyeballs that I made for something, and then didn't end up using this size. So if I wanted something smaller, I could use those. Probably going to end up going with the bigger ones, the paper mache ones. But I just wanted to point that out. You can certainly use the Sculpey clay, or you can use an air dry clay or any kind of oven baked polymer clay to form your teeth and your talons and also your eyeballs. The really cool thing about using your paper mache clay is that it will be uniform to the rest of your sculpt, because the entire thing is sculpted in the paper mache clay. And once this is sculpted in and smoothed in and then painted, this type of material, it does look like stone, and the majority of gargoyles are actually made out of some sort of stone, like a granite or some other stone-like material. So by keeping it uniform, and that's probably what I'm going to do, I'll keep it uniform and use my my paper mache teeth and eyes. It's all going to blend in and match like it was just kind of this creature that just came out of stone. So keep that in mind, but that's a different option for you. All right, first things first, I'm going to go ahead and start sculpting the head and the face. I didn't lay on any thin amount of clay to the face or the head, but that's perfectly fine because it's very nice and stable and sturdy. So initially, I'm just going to go ahead and do that, and then I'm going to start building up some of these areas. The camera angle is not going to allow you to see where I'm laying on clay. It's just the top of his head. It's not a big deal. And I'm putting on some clay on the back of what is now, I have decided, are going to be his ears. So just laying on that amount of clay, and then I'm going to really start sculpting in and building up his facial features. The only thing that we did, if you recall, in a previous segment was we did some pre-sculpting. So that's what this is, and that's going to allow me to just go in and without building up or layering on so much thicker clay, to build it up just right on top of that pre-sculpt. So my recommendation to you, if you don't have like some sort of doesn't even have to be a solid idea, but if you don't really have an idea of what you want your face to look like, go ahead and pull up some images of gargoyles. Just look at the face, different faces, and you can get ideas of where you want to build up. Maybe you want to build up a bigger brow ridge, or some kind of structure, or build up some thicker amounts of clay in between here, and just kind of go with it. Just run, let your imagination go. Use your creativity, and use, some reference photos. But sometimes I use reference photos, sometimes I don't. There are a lot of times where I just start laying on the clay, and I begin the sculpting process, and I just kind of let it flow and see where it takes me. Because you can always, if you build up in areas and you're like, nah, I've changed my mind, I don't really think I like that. Before it dries, of course, you can always remove the clay from that area and do something different. Nothing is set in stone, so to speak, except for gargoyles. But nothing is set in stone as far as sculpting until it dries. Once it dries, you're pretty much done. You can actually go back. You can't remove hardened clay, but you can certainly go back and sculpt in some more clay on top of the hardened clay, and change a little bit of, change some things that way. So in this area here, I'm just I had that indentation to make it more three-dimensional where I cut out that slit. So I'm just kind of layering in just a little bit of clay in that area, not a whole lot. Also, something to keep in mind, if you're not real experienced in paper mache art and sculpting with paper mache clay, is that this clay does shrink. It will shrink. So if it's looking to you like, wow, I think it's too thick, I've got too much clay on there, keep in mind that it's going to shrink. Alright, so once I have that kind of built up a little bit, have your paste ready and your paintbrushes to help you go in and smooth in those areas. And then because there's going to be a little bit more fine detail, when you get to certain areas, you're going to want to have smaller sculpting type tools and not just the back of a plastic spoon. So any kind of, doesn't have to be expensive or anything like that, and there are lots of other things that you could use, but you will want something smaller that you could, you know, get in there and do some more fine detail sculpting with, or that's going to help you with those more finer details once we get to those areas. I'm going to build up quite a bit more around these ears. The other thing that I'm going to do more than likely is I'm going to use the toilet paper technique, just like what I used for the pre-sculpting on his brow area. I'm going to use that to build up some more around the clay. Probably building up some kind of areas around the ear, making it a little bit more pronounced. Alright, so I have that all smoothed over a bit more with the paste. And this is an example of one of the sculpting tools that you could use for these smaller areas that you may want to have some more fine detail in, and really get in there and smooth it out even more. Just you know, this is not anything fancy. You don't have to have any kind of fancy sculpting tools for paper mache. Anything that's plastic will work, or rubber. Those work really well in my opinion. But I've got a good, you know, base layer of clay here, and I'm just going in and with my sculpting tool and smoothing it in and kind of shaping and forming it just a little bit more. Now there's quite a bit of sculpting and detail work that is going to be required for this to really come to life and look good, and it's going to take some time. I don't know if, you know, I'm going to do this in one sitting, probably not, and I don't suggest that you do either. You certainly can, you know, from start to finish. If you were, you know, say you're on a time constraint and you really need to get one done because you really want it in your Halloween yard display, or a display for, you know, like a Halloween themed party that you're having, you can certainly do it. You can certainly knock it out all at once. You know, with me, if I start getting tired and, you know, I'm just like, I just don't even want to work on this anymore, I'm so tired of looking at it, that's a good indication. If that happens to you, that's a good indication to stop. Leave it, come back to it, you know, the next day. When you're a little bit more refreshed and you're sharp, just come back to it the next day. Not a big deal. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to hurt anything if some of it dries. Because you can layer on more clay over dry clay. That's not a problem at all. Alright, I'm going to just carry on a little bit here and not really do a whole lot of build up quite yet. But I'm going to apply a layer of clay on the entire face here and smooth it out as usual. Alright, so I put a thin layer of clay. I'm just going to do one section at a time here, but I did put a thin layer of clay inside these eye sockets, as you can see. With my smaller artist brush, I'm going to use that in my paste to really get in there. I'm not overly concerned about it being super smooth because the majority of that is going to be blocked in by the eyeballs that we're going to insert. And we're going to insert those eyeballs in here while this clay is wet. So we're going to do that next. But really make sure that you do get all the way in there, push it all the way in there, just a thin layer of clay, and then get in there with some paste and a paintbrush and just apply that around there. That's going to help lock in the eyeball. and I'll show you that momentarily. Alright, and then once again, you know, I'm just taking my basic little plastic sculpting tool, and I'm going to go in and smooth out all of this clay, and then we'll be ready to insert the eyeballs into those eye sockets. Because I have this dry clay here, and then I'm applying the wet clay, you will have a seam, and I don't know if you could see that. Let me bring this a little bit closer here. You will have a seam where those two, where the dry clay and the wet clay meet. You don't want to leave it like that. You want to pay some extra attention on those areas and really blend them in so that you don't end up having what looks like a start and stop point, and then you just kind of picked it up and carried on. So really make sure that you smooth those areas in. After you do that, I would go ahead even further and take the paintbrush with the paste and smooth it in even more to ensure that you don't have any seams. Alright, I'm ready to insert my eyeballs. And I like to insert the eyeballs and also work on the mouth and insert the teeth. I like to have those elements in there before I carry on with detailing. Just because for me personally, it helps me to kind of look at what the overall aesthetic and what the overall piece is going to look like when it's all said and done. So I have a decision to make. Again, you know, I have my polymer clay oven baked eyeballs. These are smaller. And I have my paper mache clay eyeballs, which are bigger than the polymer clay ones. I can use either or. I just kind of want to, let's see. That's what the smaller ones would look like. And then that's what the larger ones will look like. I think I'm probably just going to go ahead and go with the larger ones instead of the smaller ones. Alright, so before inserting the eyeballs, make sure you do have a good amount of paste around those areas, because the paste and the wet clay is what's going to lock these in place. So basically it's going to act as an adhesive, and once it dries it will lock them right into place. So it's important to have that enough of that paste in there with the wet clay. So there you have it. My eyeballs are in place, and once that dries, it'll harden and it'll lock them in place. They won't go anywhere. Right, I'm going to carry on now, and I'm going to apply a thin layer of clay to the inside of my mouth. So I'm really going to just make sure I'm pressing it in so that it will adhere to the back of the mouth and the top of the mouth. And I'm going to apply that thin layer of clay all the way on the inside, and then take my paste and my paintbrush and go in there and smooth it out. Especially smoothing out the bottom part, because that's what people are going to see, not necessarily the top of the mouth, especially since we're going to be blocking it in with some fangs here. Okay, now on the jaw area, I am going to do some build up. Initially, you know, I'm going to go ahead again, put a thin layer of clay, and also make sure that underneath, you know, you do have that thin layer of clay underneath your jaw. And then prior to do any smoothing out or any other kind of a detail work on your mouth or your jaw area, make sure you go in with a thin layer of clay in the chest area, all the way up. Get that thin layer of clay on there. You want to have that done before working on your jaw, because it's going to be really difficult to get clay up in there after you have sculpted out your jaw. So that's the #1 reason for that. So just get that thin layer of clay in there, smooth it out. We are going to eventually put in some detail, sculpt in some detail, build up some areas in the chest area. But right now, we really want to just have that thin layer of clay in there. So I just took the time and applied that clay. Now I am ready to do some buildup around my mouth area and insert my teeth. All right, I'm ready to start putting in some more finer detail into the mouth, in the jaw area, and inserting my fangs. I have decided to go with the paper mache fangs that I made, as opposed to the polymer clay fangs, just so that it has a more cohesive look, blends in better, so it'll look completely like a stone gargoyle. First thing I want to do is I kind of want to build up some of these areas around my mouth. Let me turn this to the side here. As you can see, the jaw, the bottom jaw here, protrudes out a lot more than the top jaw. So I do want to bulk up that area a little bit, and I'm also going to do some bulking in the face area as well. So I'm just taking bits of clay here. You can roll it into like a coil. It kind of looks like he has sort of like a mustache right now. And I have these other bits of clay here. So all I'm doing is just adding a thicker layer of clay around his mouth on the top jaw. And then I'm going to go ahead with my paste and my brush and smooth that out. Alright, so I have that thicker layer of clay in there. I did the exact same thing as always. Went in with the brush and the paste, smoothed it out, and then using my plastic sculpting tool, I went in and smoothed it out even more and kind of shaped it a little bit. So that really makes a big difference, just that little bit right there. Let me turn it to the side here. There's more of a front view. This is the profile where you can see it does stick out further than it did before I put in that thicker layer of clay. I don't want to bulk it up so much because I do kind of like the look of that lower jaw sort of protruding out a little bit. But also, again, guys, keep in mind that this is paper mache clay, so it will shrink when it dries. So I suggest, you know, if you want something to be even more pronounced, add a little bit more thicker layer of clay on there. And you may have to do it in stages where this might get too thick and too heavy. So you may have to let that start to dry. It doesn't have to dry completely, but then put another layer of clay on top of it. If you get it too thick and too heavy, it might just fall off, because keep in mind, this is just the clay. There's no real armature inside that thicker portion of clay, so you do keep those things in mind. Alright, I'm going to go carry on, and I'm going to apply some more clay down to the lower part of this jaw here. I'm not going to add as thick of an amount of clay, but I do want to add a little bit in there just around the mouth area, putting that on there just like I did the top. But it's just like, basically, I'm layering it. Let me turn this way, hopefully you could see where I'm laying that clay right on the edge of the lower jaw line. So not flush to the jaw down here, but right along on the edge there. So some of it is inside the mouth, and some of it is outside of the mouth. Hopefully that makes sense. Alright, and then once I have both sides of the jaw done, once again, paste and paintbrush, smoothing it out, and then I'll go in with my sculpting tool and smooth it out even more. Okay, let me give you a look at this again. So there's the profile view of him. And then the front view. Alright, now I'm ready to insert some teeth or some fangs. I did 4 fangs or 4 teeth that have the slight curvature to them. And then the rest of them, I just sort of made them kind of a flat tooth. So I like these for the bottom. I kind of want them to kind of stick out or protrude, something just like that. So basically I'm just taking those fangs and I'm pushing them into that wet clay. So again, with that wet clay and the paste that's in there, or on the wet clay, all you have to do is press in your teeth into that wet clay in the position that you want it, and it will lock it right in there. For good measure, I'm going to go in again with my smaller brush, and I'm just going to brush around the outside of that tooth to really ensure that it's going to hold it in place and give it that permanent bond. Now on the inside, where I did use my fingers to kind of press it in, I displaced some of that clay. So I'm just going in with a little bit more of the paste on my brush and evening that out there. And then, you know, if you make sure that you're going back in and smoothing out any areas where you may have displaced the clay, or if you need to do some reshaping, go ahead and do that, do your reshaping. But the big decision is how many fangs do you want to insert. I could do a couple more and then put some in the top here. Let me show you the side view with the fangs protruding out. The other decision that you have to make is, are you going to insert, or are you going to put a tongue in there? So if you're going to put a tongue in there, my suggestion is to don't put any teeth or fangs in the lower part of the mouth. Leave that open. So I'm going to leave that open here because I am going to put a tongue in there eventually. It'll be the last, probably the very last thing that I do in completing the entire sculpture. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of determine where else I want my fangs and press those in, get those inserted, and then I'll show you guys what that looks like. So I think I'm just going to go with the 4 fangs on the bottom of the jaw. Turn this so you can see the profile. I like the way that looks. And this takes a little patience because you got to constantly go back and smooth things out. Make sure that they're in there in the angle that you want them to be in there. Moving on now to my top here. Now for the top, best thing to do, instead of pressing them inside the clay like I did on these down here, is to actually insert them into the clay. So I'm just going to take one of these teeth and just insert the tooth right in the clay, just like that. There's one. There's another one. Alright, so I went ahead and I did 4 on the top. I did make sure that I left a space here on the top as well, because again, I'm going to need room to eventually put my tongue in there. And yeah, so I just basically push them up inside that clay, and then go ahead, take your brush with your paste once again, go around the teeth, because you want those to be locked into place once they dry, and that's going to help. That paste is going to help lock those dry paper mache fangs in place inside the this wet clay. And then of course, by doing this, you are going to displace some of your clay. So go back in and smooth that out and even it out. Alright, now because I've done a lot of clay work in here and bulking all of these areas up, inserting those teeth into the jaw, and inserting the eyeballs into the eye sockets, I don't want to apply anything else to the face until this is dry. I want to see what it looks like when it's dry, to see where I need to bulk up more areas around the mouth and then around the eyes. So I'm going to let that dry completely. In the meantime though, I'm going to turn him around and I'm going to start applying clay and putting in some details into the back of him. All right, before I move on to sculpting out the back of the gargoyle, I wanted to give you another look at the back of the bigger gargoyle here. There's a lot of fine detail, and there's a lot of layers and ridges of thick clay that I've sculpted in. I did put sort of like a spine on him and then sculpted in the muscle around that. And I really like the way that this looks. Also what I did on the back of the wings, and I did use paper mache clay for this. I did not use any other material. I sculpted in, or I laid in some clay, and I built up around the outside of the wings. And then I also put in some ribbing, or it could represent, you know, some veins or some type of like skeletal structure in there, just to give the piece a little bit more interest. I went in with some more clay and I pointed the bottoms of the wings, and I sculpted in some points at the top of the wings as well. So, and I like that look. So that's probably what I'm going to end up doing with the other gargoyle that I'm working on for this tutorial. However, with the veining or the skeletal structure or veins or whatever, and the ribbing across here, I'm not going to use paper mache clay. Instead, I'm going to use the toilet paper technique. I think it's going to be much more effective and easier to deal with than, and less time consuming than trying to apply the same thickness and the same amount of clay all the way around the edges of the wings, and also in these details that I sculpted in. I will, however, still use the paper mache clay for the tips of the wings. So on that note, let's carry on and get to the back of the gargoyle. I'm going to start by putting in the spine. Basically what I'm doing, I'm taking an amount of clay, forming it into kind of a coil, and I'm going to start at basically the top of the head. Let me turn this way so you could get a better look at it. So the top of the head here, and I'm going to go right down the center. And I'm going to go all the way down. I'm going to build up a little bit thicker in these areas here, and then I'm going to taper that spine. So again, just with the clay. If you do get to a point, guys, with your paper mache clay, and you feel like it's starting to dry out or starting to feel a little bit crumbly, as long as it's not getting old and moldy, you could still continue to use it. All you have to do is simply add a little bit more of the paste, just the flour and water mixture, and it'll saturate it and add some more moisture to your clay, and it'll make it a lot easier to sculpt with. So mine did start getting a little bit crumbly and a little drier than I like. So I did go ahead and I added a little bit more paste. Alright, so I have that layered on there. Let me turn it to the side so you can see. It's pretty thick. You know, it's a good thick amount. And it tapers down so it gets a little less thick and more narrow towards the bottom. So once again, with the paste and the paintbrush, I'm going to go in and apply my paste, get this smoothed out, take my sculpting tool and smooth it out even further. Alright, so that's all smoothed in. This is what the front of it looks like. Give you a view of the side profile, and then the back of that spine that I put in there. If you want to add some texture to your piece, to that spine. Obviously now is the time to do that while the clay is wet. I am going to put a little bit of texture into mine. I'm using, this is just a plastic, like picnic type. This is what I'm going to use to put some texture into the spine here. You can use many different things. You can use a toothpick, fork, lots of different things, depending on, you know, what kind of texture you want to put in there. So with the tines down, or sideways, I should say, you don't want to rake across your piece with the tines like this, because all that's going to do is tear up your clay. Unless you want that effect, that's fine. If you don't want that effect, make sure that the tines are facing away, and then you could, without tearing up the clay, if you could, hopefully you could see what I'm doing here, you could just press in that texture and it's not really displacing a whole amount of your clay. Whereas if the tines are pointed this way, you're going to displace a whole lot more of that clay. So it really depends on the look that you're going with. And I'm just going to take and do the other side. Now when doing both sides, you're going to have to go back and forth because you are pushing that clay. So unless you want your gargoyle to have a curved spine, which there's absolutely nothing wrong with that, you're going to want to go back and forth from side to side to kind of push it back into the center position. Alright, so let me give you a look at this. That's the texture that I pressed in using the fork. Turn it this way so you can see that profile. And then you can see up in the ridge here. And then the front of him there. I didn't really put any texture into the center. You certainly could do that. You could leave it rough like this, which is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and leave it rough. There is, you know, pieces of the clay that are kind of sticking out, making it look kind of jagged. If you don't like that effect, go ahead, take your paste and your paintbrush and just knock those areas down with a little bit of the paste and the paintbrush. But other than that, that's pretty much what I'm going to leave as my spine. I'm going to go ahead and move on and start building in some of the back muscle structure. I'm going to start from the top, and once again, keep in mind that your paper mache clay is going to shrink when it dries. So if you want very, very pronounced muscles in the back here or anywhere on your sculpture, you're going to need to apply a little bit more clay to counteract the shrinkage that you're going to get. Easiest way to make sure that your sculpture has the same amount of clay on each side is I get 2 balls of clay and I kind of form them, and I make sure that they're about the approximate same size. This one looks like it's a little bit smaller, so I'm just going to take a little tiny bit more of the clay and add it to that one. And then that looks, to me, that looks pretty good. I'm going to go ahead and stick it, or the first balls of clay here, I'm going to go ahead and stick them right up at the top of the wings. And I'm just going to take my fingers and kind of smash it down a little. I'm kind of looking at it, and I think I want to bring it up just a little bit more up here. So again, 2 balls of clay that are going to be approximately the same size. And I'm just going to put them right up on top here. And again, just kind of smashing it down. I think what I want to do as well is bring those muscles down just a little bit more. So I'm going to add a little bit more clay to the bottoms. So 2 balls of clay. Smashing it down. This side looks like it's a with all of my sculptures, they're never really like completely symmetrical. So this side is a little thicker than this side over here. Not a big deal. It happens. It happens to me all the time. So anyway, I think I like that. So that's going to be the first, you know, muscles that I'm going to put in there. Got them laid in once again with the paste and the brush. I'm going to go in and smooth those over. And yes, by doing so, you're going to lose some of your the detail work, the texture that you put in the spine. That's not a big deal because you could go back over to those areas before they dry, of course, and put those markings back in there. It's not a big deal. All right, so as you can see, I put that initial shoulder blade muscle structure in there. Turn it so you guys could see from different angles what it looks like. Again, it's going to shrink. Keep that in mind. So build up more thicker layers of clay. You want it to be very, very pronounced. After I got all that in there and smoothed out, and I also made sure I feathered in and smoothed out so there's no stop and start areas where the wet clay meets the dry clay, I did go in with my fork and put back in that texture that I lost by putting in this muscle. What I'm going to do off camera, because time constraints and this video, you know, this segment's getting lengthy, I'm going to go ahead and off camera continue on and build in my muscles. I'm going to kind of curve them so that they are from this point down. I'm going to put one here, another one here, and then on the very bottom, one here, and then I'll build up a little bit of a butt, just a tiny area on both sides. So I'm going to do that off camera. I don't feel like I need to go ahead and show you that. If you don't like this aesthetic or you don't like the way that this looks, again, use reference photos. Get reference photos of what a back of gargoyles look like, and you can use that as your inspiration sculpting out any parts of the gargoyle. So, and also in this video or this segment, we did some work on the face here. So that's the way that this looks. The teeth in, put the eyeballs in. Next segment coming up, we're going to finish the sculpt. We'll put in more details, build up some more of the features in the face, put in some more muscle structure on the front of this guy, and off camera also I'm going to put in the details in one of the wings only, so that when I come back I'll show you exactly how to do that on the other wing. In the meantime, don't forget to put your sculpture in front of a fan so it'll dry. It's going to help that process along much more quickly than just leaving it out for it to dry on its own. So that's super important, and it will also prevent any kind of mold from developing on your sculpture. But anyway, that's a wrap for this segment. We'll get right back to it as soon as possible, probably within the next few days. We'll finish up this sculpt, and then in the final segment, we'll go ahead and start the paint and sealing on this guy. Once again, I thank you for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.